Hello everyone, welcome to Binary Corner, and today we'll be talking about Next.js 14 and the new change shift in the web development flow. Next.js released this whole new library for the server-side rendering. So we'll be talking about this in this video. The title of the article is Game Changer for Web Development, right? So what I mean by game changer. So basically I covered most of the stuff in this, and first I talk about like how the PHP was working, and then how the builds were doing and all these things. So since I got a good response in this article, I thought like to make a video out of, and let me explain front-end devs, like what the hell is this server-side rendering, what the hell is Next.js, right? So I'll be talking about what is front-end development, what are server-side components, what is SSG, SSR, CSR, ISR, right? All the server-side rendering thing which are coming in the front-end development. So if you're an aspirant of front-end developer, make sure you watch this video till the end, because these are the future, and if you not focus on the future technologies, then you can't move ahead, right? So Next.js released the version 13.4 with a huge update of server-side row model, server-side rendering, streaming, server-side component streaming, on all these freaking terms that we'll be talking about in this video. And then what's the future of the front-end development, right? So let's start with a basic question: what is front-end development and what is front end app? So if we imagine a user, right? Let's imagine a user is sitting here, right? And he's very angry, right? Because he can't see much of the data, right? With our technologies, with our phones and applications and all these things. But if you think of with our past, right, we have nothing of this crazy technology that we have today. So let's give our guy a screen to see something, right? So let's give him a view, right? Let's give him a view, and we'll call it as a UI, right? But what will be shown in this view, right? So we need a data to be shown, right? So that's a meaningful data that will be showing, and we all know that this data is stored somewhere in the database, right? So we stored the data in the database, and we can't read the data directly to the UI. We need meaningful data, right, out of it. So that's where we have a server which is there for us to serve the data, right? So we have a server which gets the data from the database, meaningful data, and it sends the data to the UI, right? And the UI is what user sees. So this data is usually sent through REST, right, or a WebSocket. And now if you think about this user, so now this user is happy, right? So let's make him happy. So this is the basic flow of how the front end work, right? Now we have technologies. We have various technologies in the front end. We have in the UI and in the database also. But in this video, we'll be talking about only the front end. So let's focus on front end. So if you logically think, we only need three things, which are: we need to create our structure, like how the data will present. We need to style it, how the beautification will happen, and then we need something to interact, right? If a user wants to interact with the website or with the UI, we need some kind of engine, right, to smartly work on the UI and do some meaningful things, right? So that's where we have three technologies. First is JavaScript, second is HTML, and third is CSS, right? So these are the basic technologies that we are using in the browser or in the UI or in the front end, right? So let's talk about how these things work in the browser. Let's talk about our browsers and how it renders the data. So let's take an example of a browser and how the browser works, right? So if you see on the browser, we have three technologies, and if you focus on these technologies and the browser, whether it's Chrome or whether it's Safari or whether it's Edge, right? Microsoft Edge. It only requires these three technologies, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And nothing else, right? So basically, your browser doesn't support React, right? It doesn't know React. It doesn't know Angular. It doesn't know any of these high order languages. So we call them as a high order languages, right? These are the high order languages, which we call as HOL, right? These are high order languages, but at the lower level, we only, and the Chrome only understand these three technologies. So now you get the point that if we can provide only these three things, right? Only these three things we can provide to the browser. A browser can render the things, right? A browser can render a website and they can show to our user, right? A user can see it properly, right? Now the user is very dumb. And they don't understand any of the technologies. What are the technologies that you're using in the backend or in the front end or anything, right? So this is what to see: HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So we all know about this. So just I want to recap all the front-end technologies and things. What happens if we want to create a big website, right? Let's suppose we have a big website with a lot of pages, right? And a lot of pages are having a lot of common data also, right? So let's suppose we are making an e-commerce website. And if you think on the e-commerce website, we have a static components, right? We have headers, we have footers, right? We have footers, and then we might have some common logo or something, right? So these components are very static, right? And the only thing that we are changing is basically is the content in between, right? And the rest of all the things, whether it's header or whether it's footer or whether it's logo, it's all static, right? So now let's talk about how PHP works, right? PHP, what it did is, PHP was a very nice engine that used to generate static HTML, right? So when you compile PHP, right, so it generates HTML. Now the cool part about PHP is you can configure some code in PHP and then you can create multiple HTML files. So now you understand why PHP was very much popular in the industry, right? Because with a single piece of code, we can create multiple pages. So if you take an example of WordPress website, right? So WordPress works on PHP. So PHP, what it do is, now we understand that header, footer, and all these things will be very static, right? So we don't need to replicate those code, right? So we can write the code in PHP, and then PHP can generate multiple pages, and then we can ship it very easily to the user, right? So user will see, oh my god, they are really cool, right? They have built so many pages in very short time, right? So PHP gave us the idea of like compilation, and it was very popular, still is very popular language in web development. Now, in contrast with PHP, I told you, right? We need some logic that user can interact. We need some engine, JavaScript engine to which user can interact. So that's where we can also integrate JavaScript. So basically JavaScript can be a part of PHP also, and then we can ship the HTML and JavaScript code with it, right? Usually what happens is we have a JavaScript file separate, and there are a lot of JavaScript file which is Ajax, right, and other technologies which are very old technologies, and these were used to link the HTML pages and basically PHP pages. Now the issue comes when we try to learn these technologies, right? As a developer, right? As a front-end developer, we need to learn PHP as a separate technology, and then we need to learn JavaScript as a separate technology, and the CSS and HTML, all these crazy things, right? So one more disadvantage about the PHP was it was runtime compilation, right? So runtime means when a user visits a website, they hit the server which is in the PHP, and then it returns with the HTML, and it serves to the user, right? So what we are doing is basically, if many users are coming, we have caching and all, but earlier what we used to do is every time a user is coming on a single page, we are multiplying and serving the same page multiple times, right? We are generating this page multiple times to multiple users, right? So that was some of the disadvantage of PHP that was there. And so we need an active server which is running a PHP, and then we need this code to be compiled and all these things. So we need an active server for our front-end technology, right? As I told, as a developer, I need to learn JavaScript, I need to learn PHP, I need to learn Ajax and all these technologies. How can we minimize these learnings, right? So basically what happens is, now comes in the picture of Angular and React and all these cool technologies. React, let's suppose React is there and Angular is there. So how can we improve it? So they thought of, we have a JavaScript, right? We have very good JavaScript engine which can do multiple things. Just to show the website, we don't need to change much of the pages, right? Similar to, think of it as a website like this. If you think of this website, we are not changing much, right? The header is same, the logo is same, the footer is same, right? All we are doing is just replacing this component, right? Now, why we need a separate pages, right? Why we need multiple pages of similar things, right? We can minimize it by just replacing this component, right? So if you want to replace this component, we need to do something in a DOM, right? So we need to do in the DOM, right? So DOM is basically what browser creates when we serve the HTML, right? So they create a DOM, and then with a DOM tree, basically you can go and learn on the DOM. So basically we need to do in a DOM, and we need to replace it. Now, the cool part about JavaScript is we can do it very easily using select queries and select a class and all these things, right? We can replace the DOM, we can do multiple things, right? But no one was actually working on it. But comes the part of React, right? So what React did is, React basically just replaced the DOM, and they just created its own virtual DOM, right? And its own compiler, which is written in the JavaScript, right? And what it do is, we just need to learn JavaScript. We just need to write a syntax like that, and then all of a sudden you will get HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript, right? All by just JavaScript engine running in the backend, running in your machine when you're building this website, and we can generate this HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? Similar to the Angular and in other libraries also. So we were doing is just generating the HTML, CSS, and the JavaScript, because the whole purpose of serving the website is just to generate HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and just to serve it to the user, right? So what React did is just to streamline this process in a very cool manner, right? That is very cool, right? So now with the React, you don't need to learn PHP, right? You don't need to learn PHP or Ajax and all the creepy, shitty things, right, that were happening in the front-end world. Now let's talk about what is the issue with React, right? Why the React development team is now saying not to use React, right? If you see the website, right, they're saying not to use the React, and they're saying use a framework on the top, which is Next.js or Remix or any good framework on the top of React. But why they're saying not to use React, right? So let's focus on that, right? So I'll quickly explain you why things went wrong, right, with the React. So let's think of as a React as an engine, right? And you're writing a piece of code in React as a developer, right? You're a developer here and you're writing a code. What you do is, we have a machine, right? Let's suppose we have our laptop, which is compiling our code, right? Or maybe a server, which is compiling our code, right? Basically, how React was doing is making a single bundle, right, with a single HTML file, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? And this JavaScript, if you see the size of the JavaScript, if you write a lot of, if you make a very big website, right? So what ends up happening is this JavaScript file was bloated, right? So somewhere developers were complaining that it is crossing 100 MBs of file size, right, which is very bad, right? Now why it is bad, let's talk about why it is bad, right? You see, we directly have a user in front of us, right? And think of it, if they try to load this website now, they have to download this entire JavaScript, which is 100 MB. So user will say, what the hell is this? Why I need to download 100 MB just to see a website, right? I just need to see a single page, home page I need to see. So why I need to download entire bundle, right? So that's the disadvantage of React, right? React, what it did is they shipped it in a bundle, and similar to Angular also, Angular and other frameworks also, they were shipping it as a bundle of a single JavaScript source, which is bloated, and user was complaining, right? When the code size started increasing, right? In companies or in your projects or all these things, right? Now, how can we solve this? Think of it. How can we solve this thing, right? So some of you might say, why to create a single JavaScript file, right? Let's just create multiple JavaScript files, right? Why are we creating a single JavaScript when we can create a multiple files? Like, let's suppose this is 5 MB, this is 10 MB, right? And this is 20 MB, like this. And we can do something like this, right? We can split this JavaScript file into multiple JavaScript files, right? So that is what React did in between their development cycle and the releases. So what they brought is, they brought something called code splitting. And all of a sudden, what happens is, the JavaScript got separated out, right, into multiple JavaScript files, right? So everything was fine. User was happy. User was very happy that now I don't need to struggle much, right? I can just simply download a single JavaScript file, right? I just want to visit homepage. I can just download this JavaScript file, and then HTML can serve on this, and then CSS and all these things. And I can just simply download this small JavaScript file, right? No. The answer is no. The thing is, they were all linked together. So they brought another thing called lazy loading, right? And with that, what it says is just to load only this JavaScript and not this and this and this. If a user is visiting a home page, just load this path. And how they were doing is basically on the path, right? So if you're visiting home, right? If you're visiting home, so only this JavaScript file will be served, right? And if you go something called shop, if you're making an e-commerce website, so what you're doing is just downloading this file, right, as a user, right? So they were using the paths, the website path, to define what bundle you need to download, right? So this is called lazy loading. So what we are doing is basically we are downloading these files on demand, right? Now everything is fine. User is happy. Now what goes wrong in this design, right? Let's talk about the design. What goes wrong? So what happens is, code become very complex. So let's think about the next hurdle which came across in the front-end development, right? Now let's think about the libraries, what we were using back then. We were using Lodash. So we were using Lodash, right? We were using Moment, right? Moment.js. Moment.js and all these things, right? Very big libraries, and the code base is keep on increasing of these libraries, right? The code bases keep on increasing, and even if we have a big components, right, in our code, it's keep on increasing, right? The sizes keep on increasing, right? So think of as a front-end developer, even if you have solved this problem of code splitting and lazy loading, right, by just downloading a small packet of JavaScript. The question comes, what happens if this JavaScript file, if this JavaScript file can't be separated out, right? Think of it as a single page, right? A single page, I'm creating a single page, and I need to load this single page in a one go, right? I need to load this page in a single go. So I can't do a code splitting, right? I can't do a code splitting. I can't do a lazy loading also, right? So what will I do if I'm creating a single page, which is having a huge, big logic, right? Big JavaScript things are happening, forms are happening, buttons are happening, actions are happening, which is taking a huge time. And one more thing is, when we are increasing these computations, right? Think of it as a JavaScript. And let me explain how the JavaScript works. So JavaScript is a single threaded language. So it's a single threaded language, right? Think of it as a single threaded. What is single threaded is you can only operate a single operation at once, right? And that's how the JavaScript was built. It was built very light, right? Initially it was built very light. So some of you might think, why can't we make it as a multi-threaded, right? But the whole purpose of it is, even with a small user, right? If they're using mobile, or if they're using a very small device such as watches or something like that, that's where the JavaScript engine, this JavaScript engine was made very light as a single threaded language, because you can't guarantee a user you can't rely on the user whether they have a big machines, right? They might have a small machines, might have a small devices, mobiles and all. So you have to make a very light language on a single thread, right? So that's the whole purpose of JavaScript, of being a single threaded language, right? And if you try to do, think of it, if you try to do all these operations on the page, right, whether it's data fetching, right, whether it's form and all these data fetching and all these things in the background happening, people will complain. They will say, I'm feeling very sluggish, right? Lag is there, slug is there, lag is there. I'm not able to navigate to some other pages. So they will again become very angry, right? So that's what happened when you try to load big things in a single page, right? And again, this was very much a downfall for React and all these technologies, right? Some might say PHP was good, right? It was runtime and we were serving all these things on the runtime. So what went wrong, right? Why are we moving ahead with this bundle compiler approach, right? When we were doing all this thing before, right? Just generate the HTML, static HTML, just serve it to the user, right? So now the single threaded language is doing so many things, right? But we can solve it. Right? And how we can solve it, and how Next.js was solving it, Remix and all this server side rendering was solving, is using server side rendering, right? Now, what is server side rendering? Let's go back and let's just forget everything, right? Let's just delete code splitting, lazy loading, all this crappy shit. Let's just ignore it, right? So just ignore this all what I told and just go back to initial thing, what I told initially, right? A user just want JavaScript, HTML and CSS, right? And a browser will be very happy if you give a very small file, right? A very processed file. You can say a very processed file with a very simple JavaScript logic, with a very simple HTML logic, with a very simple CSS logic, right? Mainly it's on the JavaScript only. So if you give a very simple JavaScript, the browser can load very fast because it's single threaded and it can efficiently work on that. So what we did is, in the server side render is, so now think of it, if you want to serve simple JavaScript, right? So let's suppose we have a UI, right up front in a UI, we have a user. UI just want a simple HTML, simple JavaScript that they can show to the user, right? So now that's the main challenge. How can we simplify this JavaScript, right? How can we simplify this JavaScript? By pre-compiling it on a server side, right? What I mean by pre-compiling it on the server side is, in a React, you are doing too many things, right? DOM rendering, data fetching, right? So DOM rendering was happening. Right? Data fetching was happening, right? Data fetching was happening. And then you are doing some processing also, like in JavaScript. Maybe you can have a for loop which is doing a multiple operations, which has to be done on the device, right? So all these things were causing the issue, right? All these things were causing the issue on the UI. So what we were trying to do was, we were running all this JavaScript on a user's device, right? On a user device, right? Because the UI sits with the user, right? The browser sits with the user. So all we were doing is doing all the data fetching, DOM rendering, data fetching, and for loops and mappings and all these things. So what if we just move all this thing on a server simply, right? Why we need to ship it on the user's machine when we can just do all these things, when we can do all these things on the server, right? And we can bump up the configuration of the server, simple, right? And then just send simplified version, which is very simple HTML, CSS and JavaScript, right? So how cool it will be, right? So that's where the server-side rendering is. So the concept of server-side rendering is, you are moving every damn piece of big JavaScript logic back to the server, and you are saying that we need to serve this as a pre-compiled version, right? And the best part about this is, we can create this HTML file on the server and ship it to UI, right? Directly UI. And with the new server side streaming, right, which React is bringing, we were doing it in a WebSocket or in a flow, right? In a very streamlined flow. What it's doing by Next.js, right? So Next.js is doing all these things with it, right? So what Next.js is doing is, now you think we have two components. We have client components and we have server components. Right? Client components is what runs on the client's device. These piece of code runs on user's device. So these are like buttons, right? You have a button or you have an interactive code. So if you have an interactive code in JavaScript, that needs to be run on the user's device. You can't run on a server, right? But some code, which is DOM rendering, data fetching, and for loops, big for loops, you can move all this code, right? All these JavaScript into server, right? And that's where we called it as a server components. So they bring us concept called server components. That's where the whole piece of puzzle is fitting in, with a game changer technology in the Next.js, with a game changer technology in the front end development, right? Now you have understood what is server side rendering. So basically, with all this whole piece of logic, with this whole piece of things, we were just shipping only the pre-compiled JavaScript, CSS, and HTML, and that's where we are calling it as a server components. We are keeping these components on the server and just shipping what is required on the client, right? Server components are very new, and it was new very early, like now it's very stable. Now we have understood what is server components is basically keep the big piece of JavaScript on server and just ship the lightweighted JavaScript with very small chunks, which is pre-compiled to the UI, right? We can even stream it. So that's where server-side stream called. Now let's talk about, we understood what is front-end, what is server-side. Now let's talk about SSG, SSR, CSR, and ISR, right? So let's talk about, first is SSG. Now what is server-side generation? Is those components which generated on the build time, right? Build time means when we were building this project, when we are compiling it. So if you're working on any programming language, you know what compiling means and build time run means, right? when we are doing a build time run, what we are doing is we are utilizing user's machine, whether it's our laptop or maybe it's a server, and we are utilizing it, this technology, to create static components. So these are static components. Now you might think, why do we need static components? These are the components which never changes, right? It only changes when you are deploying a new code, right? We are just building them on a build time, right? When we are building this project, right? Not on a runtime. Runtime means we are actively running it on the server, but we don't need it, right? Some of the components is like footer, header, right? They just need to be built on a server, right, at once, right? And they will be same, right, for many years, right? So that's where server side generation comes handy, right? Now let's talk about SSR. So SSR means server side rendering, and server side rendering means that you're actively generating the pages on the server. Now where it is helpful is basically you have a blog, right? And the blog needs to be rendered. Let's suppose you have a page, you have a dashboard, right? Think of it as dashboard, or maybe a website which is serving a dynamic content, right? Whether it's weather website, weather report website, or maybe something dynamic, right? Blog post and all these things. So these are dynamic things that you might change, right? All of a sudden, like you can create a blog and then ship it. The data changes, and then you need to present it on the UI. So you need an active server. So how it works is, server side rendering works is like, so you have a component and then you give it to the server. Server renders it and then ship it to the UI, right? So you need an active working server to generate this rendering, right? So that's called server side rendering, but the rendering is happening on the server, right? So this component is written in JavaScript and it's serving us with HTML, CSS and JavaScript, right? So this is what happening at the server side. So this is all happening on the server side. So that's where it's called server side rendering, right? Now let's go on the CSR, right? So CSR is very simple. CSR means client side rendering, right? So I already explained to you, right? Client side rendering means some components need to be rendered on user machine, right, directly. So this JavaScript is directly shipped to user's UI. And what are these components are? These are buttons, these are forms, everything which is very interactive, right? Everything which is very interactive JavaScript needs to be rendered on user's machine, which is client, right? So that's where we are calling it as client side rendering, right? So no runtime, no build time, all happening on the user's machine. This was happening in React before, right? So I showed you, right? All these things were all happening as a CSR, right? So now let's talk about ISR, right? So ISR is the last thing. So ISR basically means, incremental static rendering. So incremental static generation means, let's think about this thing, right? Server side rendering. So what we are doing here in server side rendering is, every time a user is visiting this page, we are rendering it on demand, right? On runtime. But there might be some instance, like their blog post, I told you, like blog post doesn't change much, right? Blog post can be changed like one time and then you can edit it maybe few in months, right? But if you're just changing it very few times, then we can keep it in a static, right? But no, we can't keep it in a static. Static is basically when we are doing in a code build, right? Code build up is happening. But when you are blogging something, right? When you're writing a post on a website, article on a website, you don't need to run your build again and again, right? So that's what happening with the ISR. So let's suppose we have a blog, right? And then this blog is only changed very few times, right? But we can create a static version of it, right? Incremental static rendering is happening. So what we are doing is we were generating it and saving it in somewhere in a cache, right? Or on a disk, right? So we are saving it on a cache and just serving it on a user, right? And then we can rebuild it once the blog changes, right? So that's what ISR means, right? So when we are changing the blog or editing a blog, we are just doing a server side rendering once and just saving it in a cache and just serving it to the user. Now let's talk about the future. So what I believe is, this is a very cool technology and you have to learn all these concepts which are happening in the market, right? The front-end development game is very much changing, right? Now we are doing server-side rendering, server-side generations, and all these cool things that we need to learn, right? So make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'll be creating content on Next.js and server-side modeling and all these server-side components and all.